kinda weird to think how much the Legend of Zelda series has had an impact on video games. From the original Legend of Zelda to Breath of the Wild, every single game has something unique and charming about it. In fact, I'd argue that The Legend of Zelda is one of the few series that doesn't have a single bad game in it.
Gee, it sure is boring around here.
Okay, let me rephrase. A single bad game that was made by Nintendo, except for one. There's one Zelda game that Shigeru Miyamoto himself has gone on record as saying that he wishes they'd done more with it before the game released. And that game is Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. Now, a lot of you probably saw this coming. Whenever the topic of bad Zelda games comes up in conversation, chances are somebody will say Zelda 2. And I think that's pretty fair. Instead of a top-down perspective, Zelda 2 opted for a side-scrolling view with RPG-esque mechanics. The game is linear, the dungeons are confusing, and the game constantly throws copious amounts of bullshit at you. Seriously, you can die to literal bubbles in this game. But while many people have brushed Zelda 2 under the rug in favor of its predecessor, I think that Zelda 2 might be more important than we all realize. In fact, I think Zelda 2 might be the key to solving one of the most debated Zelda mysteries, Breath of the Wild's placement in the timeline. Now, admittedly, this theory is dumb. Really dumb. Like, Link is dead in Majora's Mask levels of dumb. It requires a lot of what-if questions to be asked, but if you bear with me for the next few minutes, I might be able to convince you to see my way of thinking. So sit back, relax, make sure you've hit that subscribe button, and let's get started. To start this theory off, let me take you back to before Breath of the Wild had even been released. Since the second the game had been revealed, fans began speculating as to where in the timeline it took place. During one of the Nintendo Treehouse live streams where they showed off gameplay of Breath of the Wild, fans were quick to notice that the description of the rock salt item said that it was, quote, crystallized salt from the ancient sea. This set off a lot of alarm bells, as this would mean that Breath of the Wild would take place in the adult timeline long after the events of the Wind Waker. This would also explain the appearances of both the Koroks and the Rito, two species that only appear in the adult timeline. It seems like a solid cut and dry case. Until you realize that Lynels only appear in the Downfall timeline. Okay, so the game takes place in the Downfall timeline and the rock salt must come from a completely different ancient sea. That makes perfect sense. Until you realize that the friendly Zora only appear in the child timeline. You see why this is so confusing? Now, this debate would continue on until series producer Eiji Aonuma came out and said that Breath of the Wild takes place, drumroll please, at the end. Yeah, Breath of the Wild takes place at the end of the Zelda timeline, completely disconnected from everything else. So, we have elements from the Downfall timeline, the Child timeline, and the Adult timeline in one game that takes place so far in the future that the events of all the previous games have been reduced to the point on the timeline referred to as the Era of Myth. It's as if Nintendo just hit the reset button on the Zelda series and just threw everything regarding the timeline out the 10th story window into a wood chipper. Which they did. However, I think there's a way we can connect every single timeline together and create one single unified timeline that has elements of all three. Now, at this point, you're probably wondering what Zelda 2 has to do with any of this. Well, it's simple. Zelda 2 is the key that solves everything. Now, I know I can't just say that without giving an explanation as to why I think this is the case, so let me explain. Because the Zelda timeline is split into 3 branches after the events of Ocarina of Time, there's no possible way for them to become connected again unless some form of divine intervention happened. You would need something with the power of the gods themselves in order to merge the timelines together. Something like the Triforce. The Triforce is the only feasible way that the 3 timelines could suddenly merge together into one. I mean, it's an artifact gifted to the people of Hyrule by the 3 golden goddesses themselves. Whoever wields it can make whatever wish they want and have it come true. So it would be safe to assume that someone with a pure, balanced heart wished on the Triforce for the timelines to merge into one. So that explains how the timelines were merged. But I can do you one better. I can tell you who merged the timelines and why they did it. I believe that the person who merged the timelines was none other than Zelda the First. So, who is Zelda the First? Well, in the manual of Zelda 2, it's explained that long before Hyrule fell to ruin due to Ganon's invasion, there was a great king who used the Triforce to maintain peace and order in Hyrule. When he died, the prince should have become king and inherited the Triforce, but he only received part of the Triforce of power. The prince searched everywhere in the kingdom for the missing pieces of wisdom and courage, but he was unable to find them. It was then that a magician close to the king revealed to the prince that before he had died, the king had told something about the Triforce to his daughter, Zelda. The magician and the prince confronted Zelda and told her to tell them the whereabouts of the two missing pieces of the Triforce, but Zelda refused. In a fit of anger, the magician cast a spell that would put Zelda into an eternal sleep from which she would never wake. The prince tried to stop him, but it was too late. Zelda was put into a deep sleep, and conveniently afterward, the magician died. In his grief, the prince placed Zelda on a bed in a room within the North Palace. So that the tragedy would never be forgotten, the prince decreed that every female born into the royal family would be named Zelda. During the events of Zelda 2, Link explores the land of Hyrule in order to collect 6 gems hidden within the 6 temples scattered throughout the world. Once he obtains all 6 gems, he's able to enter the Great Palace where he finds the Triforce of Courage. He returns to the North Palace, and with the Triforce of Wisdom and the Triforce of Power he obtained during The Legend of Zelda, Link has the full Triforce, and he uses it to wake the sleeping Zelda the First. Now, this is where I'm going to need you to stick with me, as we're about to jump into some major speculation. According to the Zelda timeline, there's a small era of history called the Golden Era. During this era, Hyrule prospers, and the Triforce is kept safe with the royal family. However, the Golden Era comes to an end when the Triforce is used by the royal family. Not soon after, the tragedy of Zelda the First happens, and Hyrule begins to decline. To this day, we still don't know who or why the Triforce was used. However, I think I have an explanation. What if the King of Hyrule was aware of the multiple timelines, and this is what he told Zelda? Maybe he wanted to merge the timelines together, but he died before he could. And on his deathbed, he may have told Zelda what he saw in hopes that she would fulfill his dying wish. So then, if he wanted Zelda to use the Triforce to merge the timelines, then why did he hide the Triforce of Wisdom and the Triforce of Courage? Well, maybe he didn't trust his son, the prince, with the full Triforce. I mean, the prince did angrily confront his sister with a magician who had the ability to put people into an eternal sleep, so I can see why his dad probably didn't want him to have unlimited power. So why do I think that it was Zelda the First specifically who merged the timelines? Why couldn't it have been any other version of Zelda? Well, it's simple. Zelda the First is the only one who could have done it. While imagery of the Triforce appears throughout the series, the relic itself is a focal point in only a handful of games. The Legend of Zelda, The Adventure of Link, A Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker, Skyward Sword, and A Link Between Worlds. The timeline wasn't split until the end of Ocarina of Time, so the Zeldas of Skyward Sword and Ocarina of Time couldn't have been the ones to do it. All the other games take place at the beginning or middle of their respective timelines, so if the Zelda of those games had wished for the timelines to be merged, all the games following them would exist in a single unified timeline. The only place where it makes sense for the timeline to be merged is in Zelda 2 at the very end of the Downfall timeline. So then, if all the timelines are merged at the end of Zelda 2, then what happens to the Triforce? Do people continue to fight over it for countless millennia? Is there another bloody war like the Interloper War and the Sealing War? It only seems natural that people would once again fight for the Triforce. However, I think that Zelda the First knew this could happen. I think that in order to prevent her kingdom from ever falling into ruin again due to a war over some magic triangles, she hid the Triforce in a place that no one would ever think to look. Where, you might ask? Well, you've already seen where it is. The Triforce is in Zelda herself. Think about it. At the end of Breath of the Wild, when Zelda seals Calamity Ganon, we see the full Triforce appear as she uses her sealing magic. We even see this earlier in the game when she uses her sealing powers to save Link. Not only that, but if we look at the tapestry that tells of the Calamity from 10,000 years ago, right under the Zelda of that era is none other than the full Triforce, not just the Triforce of Wisdom. In order to prevent the Triforce from ever falling into the wrong hands again, Zelda the First made sure that the Triforce would be passed down to each new Zelda, all the way down to the Zelda of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. So, I guess if the Triforce is housed within Zelda, the only way for someone to get it would be to kill her. But I'm sure that will never happen. Oh. So there you have it. That's my theory as to why Zelda 2 is the key to solving where Breath of the Wild takes place in the Zelda timeline. Now, admittedly, like I said earlier, this theory is really, really dumb, but I'm kinda proud of it, as this is my first real Zelda theory. So I really hope that you guys like this as much as I do. I had a great time making this video, so I'm super proud of how this is going to turn out. So thank you guys so much for watching till the end, and if you want to see more of stuff like this, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. See ya!